Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our great presentation tonight. I'm absolutely thrilled to have Chris Command with us to talk about her success and her future plans. And at the same time, I'm going to do a little housekeeping first. Please, please, please make sure that your microphones are muted so we don't interrupt Chris or our moderator as we get into this evening. And if you are enjoying these webinars and want them to continue, please consider a membership in Equine Collaborative International on behalf of whom I am speaking tonight, because it would help us to support this platform and keep these wonderful educational events rocking and rolling. And with all of that housekeeping done, I have the privilege of introducing our moderator for this evening, a man who devotes his life to the care and protection of the wild creatures and the domestic creatures that have no voice of their own. Ultimately, a horseman of dedication and diligence, and almost always good humor, which is sometimes the hardest part. So with that all said and my gratitude expressed, I hand the microphone to Mr. Scott Beckstead.
Well, thank you, Barbara. And, I appreciate the comment about my good humor, because you certainly don't want to hear my bad humor. No one has time for that nonsense. But no, I want to start by repeating what you just said to make sure that everyone who is on tonight and listening understands that these webinars, these programs that have enlightened and uplifted and inspired and informed all of us, they don't come free, and they take a lot of work, mostly by Barbara. But if I could just encourage everyone on this webinar right now to make sure and join Equine Collaborative International, so that it becomes part of your schedule and your routine to chime in and log on and participate and watch and learn. Please consider joining, and it's a relatively small fee, and it does so much good, and it will ensure that these programs continue into the future. I think it's safe to say that the fight for our wild horses, just like the fight for our wolves, our bison, our grizzlies, all of our wildlife, all of our animal friends, they're not going to end anytime soon, and we all have to step back and take a look at the long game. These are fights that we have to wake up every single day and sort of redouble ourselves, commit ourselves to the fight. And one person who has demonstrated, I think, just been a living embodiment of that kind of just never say die work ethic is our guest tonight, Chris Command. What an incredible victory she won for the horses of the Theodore Roosevelt National Park, and she's going to be talking to us today about that effort and that campaign and what it took to pull so many people together and pull off this amazing wins. I think you will all agree with me that the victories for wild horses are few and far between. And very often, unfortunately, our wild horses are on the losing end of the legal process, the political process, the regulatory process. And so when these wins happen, it is truly momentous. And so we have to seize these moments and examine how the victories happened, what it took to pull it off, so that we can duplicate those efforts across the board, whether we're talking about the Salt River wild horses in Arizona, the Anaki in Utah, the Sandwash Basin horses, all of the horses that live on our public lands. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest tonight, Chris Command. In 2016, Chris and Gary Command moved to the southwestern part of North Dakota and immediately began spending time in the Theodore Roosevelt National Park. They were exposed to wild deer, elk, birds that inhabit the park, as well as the horses. Capturing the horses with an EF 100 to 400 lens, they fell in love with and began documenting all they could about the horses which have inhabited the park since the perimeter fences were put up around them. When questions about the horses' presence in the park arose and the suggestions were made that the horses should all be removed, Chris went to work. Boy, did she ever. The organization Chasing Horses Wild Horse Advocates was created, and with incredible tenacity and diligence, Chris has devoted astronomical amounts of time and energy to being a voice for the preservation of the TRNP horses, seeing to it that they and their place in history get the respect that they deserve. In the years that Chris was engaged in the battle for the horses of the TRNP, she devoted a part of each and every day to saving the horses. Tedious forms, petitions, governmental meetings, meetings with tribal elders, correspondence with advocates, and keeping all her followers informed about the day-to-day changes and announcement took up her time. Through it all, she never took her eye off the goal of saving the horses. We are here tonight to applaud her success and hopefully take a page from her playbook as we move forward, being the voice for all the wild horses. So, without further ado, Chris, you are a true champion, and we are excited to hear from you today. And I just want to reiterate, everyone make sure that your mic is muted. Put your questions in the chat. I will be moderating those questions, and I'll make sure that that the questions get asked, assuming we have time. So, without further ado, Chris, talk to us. The floor is yours.
Well, hello, and thank you for that introduction. I truly appreciate it. I'm very humbled by your words. And let me see if I can get my, yep, if I can get my screen share to go on. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and thank you to ECI and Scott for hosting this event and giving me a chance to talk about the ongoing advocacy work that Chasing Horses Wild Horse Advocates is doing for the wild horses of Theodore Roosevelt National Park. I was going to start by talking about how we got here and what we've accomplished, but I feel like I've talked about that enough. What I want to talk about is what I'm asked most about is how did we do this and how did we save the Theodore Roosevelt National Park wild horses? First, I want to say they are not safe yet. What's coming next is the push for federal protection for this herd. We've gained a lot of momentum over the last 2 years, and we can't stop that. We can't lose that momentum now. History shows us that the park will be back again to try to get rid of the horses. We have to use all we've gained in these last few years to stop that now. One big thing we have done in this past week was hire a government relations team, and I'll talk about that throughout the presentation. I did keep my points kind of just short and to the point, and if you have questions, by all means, feel free to stop and ask, and I'll do my best to answer. Barbara also did ask, we were talking ahead of time. I'm going to try to pepper in a little bit of, I don't think people realize that there was a lot that didn't work over the last couple of years, and we didn't stop. We found ways around it. We found ways to redo it. And so where I can, off the cuff, I will try to talk about those things too. So for people who don't know, there was a press release that went out, I believe it was April 25th, and Senator Hoeven, that's what's on the screen here, announced that he secured a commitment with the National Park Service to maintain the wild horses at Theodore Roosevelt National Park. So they immediately terminated their environmental assessment process, which, as Scott and Barbara both have said, this doesn't happen in wild horse advocacy. I don't remember ever hearing this ever happening. So this was a huge win, but there's also now a question of how are the horses going to be managed? What are they doing? They're still using Gonacon. There's a lot of concerns on what this looks like going forward. So we're working with Senator Hoeven's office and our state legislators to try to kind of get that defined and just make sure that a genetically viable herd stays. So I've been reflecting on the last 2 years as I was getting ready for this presentation, and can say key ingredients for our success have been persistence, consistency, follow through, dedication, timing, determination, and grit. The successes we've realized over the last 2 years also came from learning from the many things that didn't work. They weren't talked about as much, but believe me when I say there were plenty of things that did not work out for us. This was not as easy as it may have looked. One of the lawyers that we worked with always said, consistent pressure constantly applied. We did that. Every chance we could, we did that. The ways we applied pressure came in different forms that also led to our success. I think it's worth noting that every single small step led to being able to complete bigger steps. I think that as a society, we always think bigger is better, right? So we need the bigger organizations to be able to, accomplish this goal or stop the BLM or the Park Service or whatever. We need the bigger national news publications to be covering our stories so that we get the word out. And we think that Congress holds the keys for solving all of our issues. The truth is that our state legislators were interested in talking to their own constituents. The big organizations headquartered outside of the state of North Dakota didn't have a lot of influence here. And we also, we did horse talks with some of our state legislators. They reiterated this. We worked with American Wild Horse Campaign a lot. I will say that as one of the organizations that did help us. But our state legislators weren't interested in hearing from people from American Wild Horse Campaign. They were interested in hearing from me because I live in North Dakota. So that's something that's really key to understand and realize. We had the Wall Street Journal came out and covered the story of these horses, but that reporter admitted that he had been following Patrick Springer, who writes for our state's largest newspaper, the Fargo Forum. He was following those stories, and that's how he found out about it. And then I spent years before this process even started, trying to get Congress to help and take note of what was happening in Theodore Roosevelt National Park and management issues I had. But it really wasn't until our state legislators got involved that they started helping get Congress initiate some change. I want to start by talking first about our state legislators. Looking back at the years I was asking for federal help for this herd before the management planning process began, I wish I had asked our state legislators for help. And I did confirm this with one of our state legislators about a month ago in a talk that we were having. He agreed that there were things that they could have done years before this if they'd been asked before this process started. When I suggest to people, get your state legislators involved, I often hear that their state legislators don't care or won't help. So the big thing is, it's their job to care. Our state legislators, our federal legislators are people who are literally hired by us to do a job. So if they're not listening to you, you have to find a way to talk in a way that they're going to understand. They also don't know what's important to you if you don't tell them. That's a very big thing. I think that we have a misconception just in general in our society that our legislators, whether it's at a state or a federal level, know everything about every issue, and there's absolutely no way they can. And then I've had people say to me when I say that it's their job, as an example, our state legislators here in North Dakota are in session once every 2 years for 80 days. And they happen, by our luck, to be in session in 2023 when we were going through this process. They had almost 1,000 different pieces of legislation to look at. There is no way that one person can be an expert in 1,000 different things. And that's why there's committee hearings and different things like that to help educate them and get your side of the story out. So again, if you're not talking to your state legislators and if you're not expressing those concerns, they just don't know. The next argument is always that Republican legislators don't care about wild horses. Senator John Hoeven, one of our biggest supporters, is a Republican. North Dakota is such a Republican state that I can probably almost count on one hand how many Democratic state legislators we have. So if you're not getting somewhere with your Republican legislators, I would strongly suggest that you find the Democratic legislators in your state because they will help you navigate through a process. I talk a lot about Representative Boucher, who helped a lot and helped educate me a lot. I was lucky that he's a legislator here in North Dakota who's a Democrat. He's 5 hours away from me on the other side of the state in Fargo, and he is a Democrat. he started in politics as an advocate. So he recognized the grassroots that was happening here and related to it. And so he helped me a lot understand the process, what I can do, help let me know, like, this is what I'm hearing, you know, on the representative side, and what you need to do or what you need to ask and things like that. And he still does. And as a matter of fact, it's an honor to be able to say that when the announcement came and the park released their press release and they stopped the process, he personally called me that day to ask me if I was breaking open the bottle of champagne and just congratulate me on the victory and say, yes, please continue going on because we don't want to do this again. So, so even though he's the minority in the state, he still is very prominent in a way to help navigate through the process. So I also want to just take a minute because there's a lot of confusion about what this is. And this is our state resolution. This is not a law. So there's nothing for anyone to follow here. There's nothing to be upheld. A resolution, and this is where probably one of the banging my head against the desk moments happened. So December 12th, the park announces their plans, total elimination of the herd. Our legislators are getting ready to come into session. So I know if I'm going to do something, we have to do it now. I think it was until like maybe January 25th to get legislation drafted and to find sponsors and co-sponsors for this resolution. So this passed unanimously through the North Dakota House and Senate, 100%, which never happens. But to get to that point, I banged my head on my desk every single day because I would call and, talk to one senator who said, okay, yeah, I'll sponsor the legislation. And I was like, okay, good. And then the next day I would hear that he wasn't. And then I would call and it was like, they didn't see the point of doing this because this is the state asking federal to do something. And there's no, the federal government always wins over state was the feeling. So every day it was like a roller coaster ride. Somebody was doing the resolution, then they weren't. And then this one was going to, and so it was a lot of phone calls and a lot of just really back and forth, but it was that persistence to move forward with that. So I do want to just share that. So throughout this process, I can't tell you how much I've learned, how important it is to have the state advocating with you. And that's something that Josh Boucher said to me early on. As a state, we can advocate with you. I'm like, that's what I want. I want the state of North Dakota advocating with me. How do we make that happen? But it also, like I said, didn't happen easily. It wasn't an easy process. And even during the testimony, in the Senate testimony, one of our senators said to me, what do you expect to happen if we do pass this? Because it has no teeth. Well, when we went to Washington, D.C., and I was lobbying Congress, they let us know that this was probably one of the most powerful pieces in our advocacy toolkit was this resolution. So this was a really big thing. Again, not a law, nothing to uphold. This is the state of North Dakota asking for help from our federal legislators. Hey, there's a problem in the national park with the federal agency. We want to keep the horses. We need your help to do that. And Senator Hoeven was in a position where he could. So hopefully that helps that. So who remembers civics class? 2 years ago, I sure didn't. And that's really what all of this comes down to. It's basic civics. Our states are supposed to run independently. Then once our state identifies a need, that's where our federal legislators come in. Our federal legislators' job is to take the voices of our state to Washington, D.C. to create necessary changes. Senator Hoeven did just that. He listened to our governor, our state legislators, and the people of North Dakota. Getting the state legislators involved was a key to getting his support. I always say, too, I'll throw in here, I talked to our House Majority Leader, Mike LaFleur, quite often, and I have his cell phone number, and I've talked to him so much that when he answers the phone, he's like, hi, Christine, how are you? Which is great. But when I contact Senator Hoeven's office, I'm talking to one of his aides. When Mike LaFleur calls Senator Hoeven, he's calling Senator Hoeven. So he's got a direct line to him that I don't have. And you better believe that Senator Hoeven is listening to what our state is asking for and what they need. So that's his job, again, to help realize a need that we have in North Dakota and bring it forward in Washington, D.C. So one congressional staffer in Washington, D.C., when I was lobbying Congress, also said, that the state resolution was great, but if you could take that down to a county or a city level, that was even better. And we did that. I went back and we actually talked to the city of Medora, where the park is located, and they did their own resolution asking the park to keep the horses. And then when these resolutions were done, they were always sent to the Secretary of State, who then sent them off to our federal delegates, the park, the National Park Service headquarters, and all of that. The second big thing is the press, and I can't stress this enough. The press also only knows what they're told. There's no way that every reporter, although we were lucky to have Patrick Springer, who knows a lot about the history of these horses and was really dedicated to keeping this in the news in different ways and different angles that he could. But most of the press only know what they're told. Initially, no one in our state was talking about the horses in the park's plans to remove them when that announcement came out. They glazed over the press release and put it to the side until I called them and brought key points to their attention. The other thing I want to say is that every time I talk to the press, I'm extremely nervous. The first time that I had to drive to Bismarck to be on a TV show live, my husband can tell you, my stomach was in knots. He couldn't understand what I was so nervous for. I'm extremely nervous whenever I talk to the press, and I'm afraid that I'm going to sound like an idiot or screw something up or who knows what. But I'm always told that I'm always calm, respectful, and I'm very informative. So I would suggest that anyone talking to the press, make sure that you're that. I know wild horse advocacy there's a lot of emotion involved, but really trying to stay on point, stay focused, and facts, make sure that you're having facts, is also helpful. The other thing too, like I had said, we always immediately want the big guys to cover the story, but every single newspaper article is important. Like I said, the Wall Street Journal reporter that came out heard about the horses here through these stories like this that Patrick Springer did in the Fargo Forum. The other thing that I learned through this process, and I don't know that I've ever heard anyone talk about this before, but this was interesting to me, and it's something that I think advocates should keep in mind. Every state has their own Associated Press office or offices. I think here in North Dakota, we have one. Other states may have more. But the job of the Associated Press reporter is to take the state's stories to a national level. So keep that in mind. So getting a relationship with your AP reporter would also be something that, should be looked at for getting the story out. So the other thing too, once articles are written, we always encouraged our followers, especially when the AP wrote stories, because they went, across the whole United States and internationally sometimes. If that story was covered in your state, write a letter to the editor. Keep that story alive. I can tell you that our state legislators let me know that part of why they had to take an interest in this was that they could not open the newspaper from December 12th until that comment period was over. And I think even later than that, there was not one day that you opened up a newspaper in North Dakota and there was not at least one letter to the editor talking about the ridiculousness of trying to take these horses from the park. So the legislators seen that, and they knew that they had to take some kind of action because this was getting to be a heated topic in North Dakota. So I can't stress that enough. Then I always also say too, sharing the links to these stories is a great way to let the media know that there's interest in this, right? Because the bottom line is, if they're not going to have a base for their stories, they're not going to continue to do them. I know that some people complained that, I know the Fargo Forum, some of the stories were behind a paywall. It's worth the $1 to pay that subscription and let that newspaper know this is important. I want to read this. I can't stress that enough. And the other side of that too is that, again, we were lucky to have someone like Patrick Springer and a lot of other great reporters in our state. Why don't we want to support that journalism, right? I mean, Patrick Springer went above and beyond, really covering the stories and covering them from different angles. So why don't we want to support that and let his newspaper know that we appreciate that? The other thing is making sure that they have pertinent photos. I know one of the first news reporters that I talked to on the news, I'm watching the news and I'm watching the story and they're flipping all these pictures of bison in the park. And I was like, do you need pictures of the horses? Because I have that. I can get that for you. So that was something else that they started to really appreciate, was different pictures or videos if they were on TV, because it gave different life to the story. So also, I know that there was one reporter, I know that he put something on TV, and he obviously had a picture of a domestic horse behind a fence that was clearly not one of the Theodore Roosevelt National Park horses. So making sure that those are, like this picture in here is actual horses in the park. So so making sure that the pictures are relevant to the story, because it also helps tell the story. Third, other advocates. There is no way I could have gotten through this without other advocates helping me. And this is where I think we fail in wild horse advocacy. This is the biggest place that we fail, because we just can't get along. When this process started, I can tell you 2 years ago, I had very little to no knowledge about what the NEPA process was, how this was going to work, what was going to happen, what to expect next. It was a lot of other advocates that came forward that were helping me understand this process and navigate through it. I think that, you know, it's probably a wish that it may never come true, but I think that we need to focus more on what we have in common than what separates us, because the amount of people that came together to help the Theodore Roosevelt National Park horses is incredible. And if that could be replicated in other places, it really helps elevate that voice. Fourth, historic preservation. This is something an advocate talked about early on, and I didn't fully understand. But this honestly probably was one of the biggest things that caused the park to retract that environmental assessment. So in a nutshell, I do believe that this is what helps save the wild horses, but knowing what the history of wild horses in your area are would be helpful. One way to find this out, if you don't know that, is to contact your historic preservation office. So the other thing is that I found out, and I found this out from calling again, I spent the last 2 years calling anyone and everyone I could to find out what we could do or what they could do to help us save the horses. And I had actually called the State Historic Preservation Office, and I said, you know, I want to know how we go about finding the wild horses at Theodore Roosevelt National Park significant in the state of North Dakota. And the person I talked to said, well, actually, we're doing a process right now where we're considering that, and the public has input. So this is big. Whenever a federal agency starts on a process like this environmental assessment that the park did. So I would think that this also applies to the BLM, Forest Service, whatever else. The Historic Preservation Act has a Section 106 process that says that agency has to prove that what they're doing is not going to compromise the historical cultural significance of the area. And our state historic preservation officer actually at the beginning of April sent a 21-page document to the park. I think it was 5 or 7 pages with supporting documentation to make up the other 21 pages, showing the park that there is historical significance here. So, and this is also something that goes out of the hands of the federal agency, because the public can weigh in directly to the State Historic Preservation Office. So the agency has no control over that. I know our organization sent in a petition with just under 4,000 signatures. And I know people from all across the United States sent, because I got copies of their letters, also sent letters and documentation. And so this was a big thing that I don't think is talked about enough either. Fifth, our legal team, absolutely. Our legal team helped, and it helped that we had lawyers. Not only did they give weight to our fight, but they were also instrumental in helping us understand the process. Our lawyers brought their own experiences to the table that helped understand the process, and they helped write our comment letters. I think the first comment letter in March of 22, I wrote almost 50 pages, and they went through and tweaked it and, you know, added the legal flair to it. And then they wrote our last comment letter that we shared with American Wild Horse Campaign. They did that with us. So this was a big thing too. I will also say that we started working with our lawyers long before this process started. And the very first thing I did that happened was I had a long conversation with our lawyers and explained to them what my concerns were, what was going on, what was happening. And they took time to review what I was saying, look at the facts, you know, do their own research before they decided if they would take this case or not. So it wasn't like an automatic, but they saw that there were things going on wrong at Theodore Roosevelt National Park, again, before this process even started. So, and to that, I will also say, you know, Heather Hellier from Save Our Wild Horses and I have been trying to do things to get more people involved and help kind of try to replicate what we've done here. And the big thing that I think we're another place where we fail in wild horse advocacy is we're not proactive, we're reactive. We wait until the BLM is, you know, a month away from rounding up a herd, and then we start, you know, ringing the bell and letting the sirens go. But we need to figure out a way to be more proactive, and those are things that we're talking about on Facebook and stuff too. So if you follow us on there, hopefully we can start making a difference in different ways too. So last, public outcry. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. This quote by Margaret Mead got me through a lot of crazy days. I keep telling people it was not me, Chris Kaman, who did this. It was the strength of our combined voices that created change. It was the letters to the editors that helped our state legislators be aware that this issue was important to the citizens in North Dakota. It was all of us coming together and elevating that voice that really made a difference. Like I said, years before this, I was complaining to anyone who would listen and no one was listening because it was just my voice. So really that, you know, getting people together was key. The other thing is that the park also, in this 1978 environmental assessment that they refer to a lot, I always think it's kind of funny because it's almost like in that document that they referred to so much, they gave themselves a warning. You know, we never suggest completely trying to eliminate the horses from the park because public outcry and local pressure is too great. And so I always thought it was funny that they went ahead and tried to do this anyway, like when they were forewarned, you know, not to do something like this. So I do want to just take a minute and talk about where we go from here. We're still fighting. So this isn't over. If we stop right now, like I've said, it'll just be a matter of time before the next superintendent comes along or the next, you know, whoever comes through and says, hey, we're getting rid of the horses again, because history shows us this. This is not the first time that this has happened. This has happened repeatedly since the horses were fenced into the park. So Chasing Horses Wild Horse Advocates feels that it's critical that we keep the momentum going and push forward for federal protection for these wild horses that call Theodore Roosevelt National Park home. We're continuing to work with our state legislators on what they can do to continue to advocate with us for these horses. They'll be in session next year, so I'm trying not to talk to them in the 11th hour like I did last time. I'm trying to be proactive and figure out what we can do now, and I'm really excited, and we'll be talking about it coming up as it develops, but there's something that we talked about in our last meeting with Mike LaFleur, and he was pretty excited about it. So I'm hoping he stays excited because I have some more exciting news about that for him, and then we'll see how that plays out. And like I said, I'll share that more as we go along. I just want to make sure that it's going to happen before I start talking about it, but it's exciting. We're also staying in touch with Senator Hoeven's office. There's a lot of question right now about how these horses are going to be managed and what they're going to do. You know, on one hand, they've said that they will not be moving forward with any of the analyses that they presented. And one of those is the 1978 EA. And then on the other hand, you hear they're not doing anything that was suggested in the environmental assessment. They have scrapped all of that, but they're going to go back to managing them back to the 1978 EA. So there's a lot of question about what they're going to do. Senator Hoeven does keep saying a genetically viable herd. And a quick story about that and just the importance of making sure that you're educating your legislators. When I was in Washington, D.C., I actually met with Senator Hoeven himself. And we sat there, you know, took a couple pictures, talked for a few minutes. And he was getting ready to leave. And he said, you know, I think we're going to be able to keep horses in the park. And I said, okay, well, that's great. And as he started walking away, he said, we might have to compromise on the numbers a little bit. And I was in shock that he had said that, but I stopped him and I said, we can't compromise on the numbers. I said, Governor Burgum, our state legislators, and the people of North Dakota want a genetically viable herd to stay in that park. That's what we need. And that's 150 to 200 horses, which is what we have now. So thinking back to that moment, if I would have just let him continue to walk away, would the words genetically viable herd have ever made it into his vocabulary or into the things that he said or conversations with the Park Service? I don't know. But again, it's just that push for, the Park Service is telling him one thing, fine, we'll keep the horses, but it's going to be 35 to 60. That's not acceptable. That's not what we want. So, Senator Hoven's office also agreed to look at federal legislation with us. That's not to say he's going to do it, but he did tell me early on that he wanted to wait for this process to be over. And when I talked to his office the day that the press release came out, he was, well, the horses are staying. So do we have, I said, yes, we have to do it. And you said that you would do this. And I told him our state legislators want this. When I talked to Mike LaFleur and I said, the next thing we need to do is get federal protection because otherwise we're going to do this again. Well, our state legislators don't want to do this again either. This took a lot of their time. Not like it was a bad thing, but it was a focus, obviously, maybe not to all of us, but there are other more important things happening in the world, right? Than the park trying to take horses out of a park. So there are other ways that they can use their time and they would like to see an end to this too. They don't want to keep going back to this in their sessions. So Hoven's office is willing to work on federal legislation with us. Since I have learned, I'm working really hard to learn my own limitations and my strengths and what I could do. I cannot write federal legislation, so I will not be doing that. But we have hired a government relations team to help us navigate through this process. So, but I did this week learn something new, and I took a crack at writing my first grant proposal letter. So I'm working on that so that we can get some funding that we need to continue moving on, because that's the other thing people don't understand. Someone said to me, like, we did this on a shoestring budget and nothing could be, I mean, that's absolutely true. Shoestring budget. This is a very, very small organization. We depend so much on our donors and our followers to make donations, but going through with federal legislation is going to cost us a lot of money. And there's a lot of other things that we want to do too, to also help keep this, keep the momentum going and just keep educating the public. So we're going to look at doing some grants, but grants also take time. So we also plan to keep pressing forward. We plan to keep educating our followers. We plan to keep going until we have federal protection for this herd. Federal protection is going to take us years to get through, just so that everyone's aware of that. So this is not a quick thing. It's not an easy thing. But the biggest thing that everyone needs to realize is that 2 years later, and hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars later, we still have no management plan for these horses. We also have no idea how the park's going to manage the herd. And these are serious questions that we're also raising with our legislators now. So we know that there are things that can be done, and we're working on that as we work toward federal protection. So that's all that I have. So thank you guys for your time. And if anyone has any questions, or again, if you want me to elaborate on anything, I'd be more than happy to do that.
Well, thank you, Chris. That was a lot of really, really good information, and I know I have just learned a lot and have some new tools for my toolkit. So thank you for that. We do have some questions. How many members are in Chasing Horses Wild Horse Advocates?
How many people are on our board? We have 5 people on our board. Followers, we have, I couldn't even begin to tell you. We have probably combined on social media, we have over 100,000 people following us on social media.
Nice. Do you see tourism fluctuations perhaps related to foaling season?
Not necessarily. I can tell you that also, my other full-time job, because this became more than a full-time job for me advocating for these horses, but my other full-time job is that my husband and I have a small business in Medora. And one of the things that we do is because people had asked so much, we take people out on tours to see the horses, and people come all the time. There's no, it's not necessarily just foaling season. So
Are there any natural predators in the park that influence the horse population?
Nope, they have no natural predators, just humans.
All right. How often, this is from Marcella, how often and what kind of documentation or proof were you able to use to educate legislators? You told a legislator that existing numbers of TRNP wild horses was required for genetic viability. Did he just believe you, or did he did anyone question that?
So this is where I was really kind of lucky with our press in North Dakota. There was one reporter who's sadly not with us and not in the state anymore. She moved on somewhere else. But early on, when I contacted that station and said, "Hey, did you know that the park was planning to get rid of all the horses?" She was one of the first ones to ask me to come into the station, and I talked to her, and she asked me after our interview, "Who else can I talk to about this?" So I gave her a bunch of names, and when I said to her 150 to 200 horses is what's needed for a genetically viable herd, that's something that Gus Catherine has said over and over again. I know that if you look at Eric Mulvar, he has said it's really more. I think, Scott, did he say at the conference last year 240, I think, was minimum for genetic viability? And this is
Yeah,
also reproductive horses.
yeah.
So she actually called Gus Catherine and had an interview with him on the news. So it was nice that he spoke out actually about the horses here and reiterated that need for genetic viability.
Is there any cattle or sheep grazing in the park, or are there any other types of leases like oil or gas or anything like that?
No, there are no leases like that. So the other thing too, I think we don't talk enough about this, and it kind of goes along those lines. We had the North Dakota Stockmen's Association advocating with us to keep these horses. So, so that I think is really important too, and just shows how the whole state could come together and make things work.
That is amazing for livestock producers to support wild horses. That's really amazing. Okay, we have Craig Downer asking, have you considered points from the reserve design and rewilding approach to attaining genetically viable and self-stabilizing populations, such as by maintaining mature social bands in the herd?
I think the biggest problem we have right now with genetic viability is that, for anyone who doesn't know, Theodore Roosevelt National Park was the hotspot for experimenting with Gonaconda since 2009. So we don't know how many reproductive mares we have. We do know that from that, we learned from FOIA documents that were obtained that 19 to 24 mares in the original study had not returned to fertility after 7 years. Now, I do know at least one of those mares has returned to fertility since, but they're still darting horses with Gonaconda, which is something that needs to be addressed with Senator Hoven's office, because if we just got them to stop, their plans to eliminate the horses, but they're still using Gonaconda, then they're still eliminating the horses, right?
Yeah. This is again, Marcella, how were the legal fees financed? Was there some initial estimate of legal costs to work with for fundraising?
So a lot of times, yes. Again, we started this long before March of 22. So our lawyers always told us, like, if there was something they were going to do, they would give us an estimate of what it would cost. Eubanks and Associates is a great environmental law firm. I can't speak highly enough about them. They also, they don't charge full rate. I don't know how else to say that. Like, they could get a lot more money than what they do. We were lucky that American Wild Horse Campaign did help us with legal fees. And I do believe that had this gone to litigation, American Wild Horse Campaign would have litigated with us, which is huge when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars from, again, an organization working with a shoestring budget. So legal fees were paid either through our donors we did get a couple grants over the last couple of years that helped offset some of those costs. But really it was mostly like, everybody sending in their $25, $10, $100, whatever they could afford. And then, yes, some help from American Wild Horse Campaign to help cover our legal fees. Like, for example, our last comment letter, American Wild Horse Campaign signed on to that with us. And so they covered the legal fees for that. But we had the final say. We always had the final say in what was happening. Because again, and I can't stress this enough, it's great that American Wild Horse Campaign was involved, but our state legislators and they want to hear from the people who give them a job. You know what I mean? And no one from American Wild Horse Campaign was living here in North Dakota. So it's critical that people who live in that state are involved in the fight.
What did the government relations firm do? How did you find them? Who retained them? And how were their fees funded?
So their fees are not funded yet. So this is what we need to raise money for now. And this is why we're trying to get grants. I can say, and I'm very happy, the team that I have found are people that have actually been fighting with us over these last few years. They were fighting with us in a different capacity, and now they've formed a new organization and they're trying to help. Really, one of their goals is to help smaller nonprofits like ours who would never get time with anyone, you know, helping to lobby through Congress or navigate through this process, because this is a whole new area. Again, when I tell you I did not know what the NEPA process was or all the ins and outs of that 2 years ago, I'm not lying. This was a very quick learning curve for me. So now navigating through federal legislation is going to be a whole nother thing. And it's not just as simple as let's draft it, give it to Hovind, and then, you know, la-di-da, it's over. You know, it's got to be shepherded through Congress. We've got to find sponsors and co-sponsors. We've got to do it. You know, if we do it in the Senate, you've got to do it in the House, and there's a whole lot to it. So that's where they're coming in, and this is where we need to raise money. I was talking to Barbara before this, and I'll say this, and I mean this as respectful as I can. It's nice that, you know, we just had a lot of fundraisers going to help find homes for the McCullough Peaks horses, you know, and to help support those people that are trying to give them homes or send them to a sanctuary, and that's great. We just saved a herd of horses. Like, we just saved a herd of horses, literally. And that doesn't happen. And we need money to continue going on. And it would be great to have that kind of enthusiasm to help us continue what we're doing, because the government relations team that we need to move forward isn't going to be cheap, but it's the necessary next step. Like I said, if we don't continue now with the momentum that we have, it would be a waste of what we've done the last 2 years.
We've got a question from our friend Juliana over across the pond in Europe. Juliana, thank you so much for being such a steadfast supporter of our American equines. We sure appreciate it. And Juliana always comes with great questions and comments. She wants to know, please, how can your great success follow the same program to protect horses and burros in other areas?
And that's kind of what I tried to outline here. You know, success points that we've had. And again, I think in addition to loving wild horses, I'll just say it this way. I love Star Wars, right? Yoda. There is no, you know, you either do it or you don't. There's no try. I'm going to try, or I can't. Those words have to be taken out of your vocabulary. I literally talked to anybody and everybody that I could that would listen to find out how do we save these horses? What are your thoughts on how we do this? How do we do this? And we have built such a coalition because of that. You know, it's only made it stronger. When our state legislators weren't sure that they were going to do a resolution, I didn't go, okay, well, call me when you figure it out. I had so many days to get this done. So every single day until I had somebody fully committed, I was on the phone just going through the list of our state legislators. And you can find this on your state's website. Again, your state legislators are going to want to talk to you. Other people can weigh in, and they did. Other people weighed in and talked about tourism and, you know, I won't come to your state, you know, and things like that. And that matters, but not as much as their constituents. I talked to, like I said, I was talking to one of our legislators, and I said, you know, I'm looking back in hindsight, and all these people are asking me, how do we replicate this? I said, and again, like I had said, we all think big, right? I called Congressman Armstrong. I was calling Senator Hovind. When I called Senator Hovind's office, and I've shared the story before, I used to call his office all the time, and I would talk about, you know, how they were culling the horses or the Gonacon that was going on or management issues that I had. And so it got to a point where they had talked to me so much that when I called Senator Hovind's office, the woman would say, Chris, Senator Hovind is aware of your concerns about the Theodore Roosevelt National Park wild horses. Is there anything else that you would like to add? And it was like, well, yeah, I want them to do something. Well, I asked our state legislators, what if I had talked to you instead of Senator Hovind's office? Would that have made a difference? And he said, actually, yeah, because we could have, again, they could have been more proactive. They could have alerted Congress that, like, hey, we've got some concerns that things aren't so great at Theodore Roosevelt National Park with the management of the horses. And again, any resolutions or things like that they were doing went to Congress. It's a lot more impactful when our House Majority Leader or our state legislators are sending things to Congress than when Chris Command is calling, right? And now, again, when you're saying that, legislators don't care, or they don't want to know, when I call Senator Hoven's office now, it's thank you for your work. Thanks for keeping this in the news. Thank you to you and your followers for making this happen. It's quite a different story, but it took years to get that relationship established. And that's a big thing that people need to do. The press is another big thing. Like I said, I didn't know that the job of the AP office was to bring state issues to a national level. I don't know how many people knew that. Make friends with your AP reporter. They may not cover every story, but he talked to me all along the way to stay updated, to stay informed, and to stay educated. So that's another big way to get the story out into a national level.
So another question we have, did anyone push back with the argument that the wild horse population must be managed to protect the land from degradation?
Absolutely. And I can also tell you that when I talked to Senator Hoven's office, when the press release came out and they had abandoned their plans for the EA, Senator Hoven's office also, so that people understand, like, there's a lot of other things going on in our national park, and here in southwestern North Dakota, we have a really big thing happening where they're building a Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library. So there's a lot. So like this part of the state is a very big hot spot right now. And there's a lot that's happening, and a lot that the senator's office is working with the park on different projects. So, and I always say too, personally, I love Theodore Roosevelt National Park. There is nothing that I would not do or have not done, or services that me and my husband have not volunteered to help, at different times for the park. We disagree with the management of the horses. So that's the problem. So Senator Hoven also wants to help protect the park and that entity. And so part of what they were looking at too, when this announcement came out and they said they were keeping the horses, was making sure that there weren't going to be other groups coming through to sue the park because the horses should go. So yeah, there absolutely was some opposition, but we know overwhelming. I think during the first public comment period, they had like 19,000 people who had commented, and 45 of those comments were in favor of the park's plans to get rid of the horses. But yeah, so it's something that's a concern, and again, a concern to Senator Hoven's office too, because now they don't want there to be a lawsuit the other way to the park, right?
Were roundups, and I think I know the answer to this question, but was the Park Service considering like a helicopter roundup? Is that how these horses would have been gathered, or would they have been gathered in some other way?
Nope. They were gonna, so the park went away from helicopter roundups in 2013, was the last helicopter roundup they had here. They were using low stress methods to remove the horses. So they would sedate younger horses. They would only remove horses like from 4 months old to 3 years old. They would sedate them and take them to their holding facility on the park property. They announced with this plan that when they remove the horses, they would be going back to helicopter roundups, week-long helicopter roundups. And then the horses are put on a government surplus website. No one is vetting the buyers and no one's following up. And if horses didn't sell after several attempts, which they wouldn't define several attempts, then they would simply euthanize the horses.
Barbara would like you to put how we contact Chasing Wild Horses in the chat for those who would like to help you. Oh, it looks like it's there. Okay.
Heather took care of
Yeah. Craig wants to know, are there any ongoing studies of the TRNP wild horses, for example, of their ecological relationships, historic and evolutionary roots, etc.?
I actually just talked to somebody today that is interested in having me collaborate with them on something like that. And it's at a very, very beginning stage of a project that they're hoping to get funding for. So yeah, we'll see. I think what was proposed to me today was pretty interesting. So we'll see how that moves forward.
And Heather, thank you for putting the Facebook link to the Facebook page for auctions and donation possibilities. Yeah, then Craig says also behavioral studies and comparative to behavior norms. So that would, I assume, be that project you just mentioned.
Yes.
All right. During periods in between threats by National Park Service to entirely remove the wild horses, have there been efforts, successful or not, to influence the way wild horses are managed, like whether to use birth control and which kind, whether or not to conduct a roundup, limiting exercise of grazing leases, etc.? We know there are no grazing leases, but I think yeah.
So this is where this is why our organization actually got started. We're watching. So again, when my husband and I moved out here, you know, we start falling in love with these horses, and then every year they're calling all the babies, and the horses aren't getting any younger, right? So we have an older herd of horses, and then we're getting rid of all the young horses. So what eventually happens, right? To us, it wasn't rocket science, but to other organizations that advocate in different ways for these horses, it made sense. So we started challenging that. You can't keep taking all the young horses and leave older horses, because eventually there's going to be no horses. So we always say that the park has been carrying out this plan for a while. They just let us know last December, you know, what the plan was. So, so during they would, like I said, they would call every horse 4 months old to 3 years old every year, using low stress sedation methods. We did get that stopped in 2020 with COVID. The park was still planning to do that. I can say from 2020 through 2024, they've only removed 4 horses from the park. But before that, from 2015 through 2020, there were hundreds of horses that were taken out of this park, auctioned off, sold. The things that people are seeing now with the legacy Mustang Sanctuary and them going under, there's a very big question about what happened to 36 Theodore Roosevelt National Park wild horses that went there. So there was a lot of mismanagement over the last few years, and these were things that we were challenging. We were also challenging the use of Ganacon. We knew, and we reached out to other larger wild horse advocate groups, and we're trying to get them to be alerted about Ganacon, because we knew they were going to perfect it here, and then they were going to take it to the Western Range, and that's exactly what happened. And that's how I got involved with American Wild Horse Campaign, was a lot of persistence, again, trying to get through to them, and then actually meeting a lot of great advocates who are still friends and still helping in other capacities. So
Heather says, I know the answer is yes, but Chris, can you just emphasize for a minute that others can use your formula to possibly make improvements on wild horse and burro protections in other states, starting at the state level and moving up to the federal level?
absolutely. So I feel very weird whenever somebody asks me how I did what I did, because truthfully, when I say I literally called everyone I could call and talk to anyone I could talk to, I'm not exaggerating. I know that one big thing, and we did do a horse talk about this just to kind of clarify this, because I see a lot of calls to action where people say, contact the local chamber of commerce and tell them to stop this roundup. That is such a waste of time and such a waste of resources and energy. We actually advocated with our local chamber, and because we had a relationship with them because of our business, they were one of the first ones I talked to. Hey, what do you think? How do we navigate through this? What are some things we could do? And one of the things that he told me, a couple things he told me, like when he told me, I was like, that doesn't even make sense to me, but all right. But one of the things he said was, our local chamber of commerce, when our legislators are in session, they put together, it's called Coffee with the Legislators. And it's something every Saturday, different legislators throughout the state. And then they'll have somebody, like the first time I went, our state's attorney was there. And so you sit there and they talk about what they're doing in the legislative session, what's important. And then afterwards, the public who was there gets to ask questions to the legislators and have them respond. And the really cool thing is that these were recorded, so I could share them with our followers too once the videos were uploaded, and say, hey, you know, if you fast forward to here, you could hear what they said about it. So when that was first suggested to me, I thought, you know, Coffee with the Legislators, like, I don't have time for this, right? I was at every single one of these things because it was one of the greatest ways to be in front of our legislators, especially when they were still flip-flopping over Are we doing the resolution? Are we not? Who's sponsoring it? Who's not? And then also talk to the community and have them hear what was happening, because a lot of people still didn't know. So, so yes, absolutely. There's no reason why you can't call the press. Like I said, and I don't know if I mentioned this today, but when the announcement came out from the park in December of 22, and they said they were eliminating the horses, me and my husband sat and watched the news that night, and there was no mention of it at all on the news. And we were like, okay, well, maybe tomorrow. Tomorrow came and there was like still no mention. So the third day I called every news station in the state and said, did you not get the memo that the park's planning to eliminate all the horses? No, they're not eliminating all of them. I'm like, no, that's their proposed action. That's what they're doing. And then it was, can you come in and talk to us, or can you give us a quote, or can we do a Zoom? So really, I think that assuming that our state legislators, our federal legislators, and the press know nothing unless you tell them is a great way to move forward and try to get them to help, because those are really big keys to doing anything to move the needle with wild horse advocacy.
Linda says having livestock influences fighting against us, as well as mining, etc., in some HMAs is a big difference in our fight versus yours. But you shared some great tips that can apply to both. Congrats on your tenacity to get it done and keep up the good fight. Okay, well, we're closing in on an hour. Let me just take Casey Betts. Thank you for this presentation, Chris. You covered a wide range of issues that can be used elsewhere, including Canada. We'll spread awareness about what Chasing Horses is doing for wild horses. Keep up the great work that you're doing. Cheers from a Canadian supporter. So, Chris, you, I think it's safe to say you've got some amazing support out there. All of us are deeply grateful for your outstanding efforts, for your fighting spirit, for your incredible work ethic, and for taking the time this evening to share these tips and to share this story with us. And hopefully we can all put what you said into our toolkit and keep the fight going for all the wild horses elsewhere.
Well, thank you. And again, Barbara, thank you for giving me the time. And Scott, thank you for moderating, and everyone for being here and all your support.
Barbara, back to you.
Thank you, Scott, for another wonderful job moderating and keeping those questions all organized and understandable. Chris, I don't really know what to say. I think I need another pedestal, because I have found another heroine, somebody that can stick to it and get it done, but has the ability to recognize that done does not mean finished. I wish you only the best and every support I can offer in continuing to keep these horses safe and in removing some of the things that are still problems, even though the horses are there and alive. I know you've got a battle on your hands there. I am especially grateful because it is not very often that I get to host these things where it starts right out being happy news, and we all needed that little injection that you made possible. And I know you had a team behind you. I know you had lots of help, but every great team needs a great leader. And I am very, very appreciative of what you've been able to offer tonight and over the past couple of years. And I would tell you to take a day off and put your feet up, but I know better. So
Well, thank you.
thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. And I hope we can count on hearing good news from Chris again real soon.
I hope so too. Thank you.